I put 7 so-called Chanel dupes on skin, on blotters, on scarves, and on the inside of a wool coat over 2 full days. And by the 4-hour mark 3 of them had already collapsed into something flat. One turned vaguely metallic in a way no Chanel ever should. And one was so well judged that it made the original feel slightly overdressed. That is the part I want you to hold on to. Not cheaper, better judged. Remember that phrase, because the whole luxury fragrance industry survives on your assumption that price and judgment are the same thing, and they very often are not. This test matters because Chanel occupies a strange protected position in perfume culture. Women are trained to speak about Chanel as if it exists outside comparison, outside value, outside normal consumer logic, and once that happens, the conversation stops being about perfume and starts becoming about obedience. You know the feeling. You smell a Chanel you once loved, you notice the texture is thinner, the base is cleaner in the less flattering way, the price has gone up again, and you are still somehow expected to call it untouchable because of the name on the bottle. That little moment of self-doubt is exactly what this industry counts on. So for the next few minutes, we are not going to play that game. The first one was Dossier Floral Grapefruit, positioned as the thoughtful woman's answer to Coco Mademoiselle, and priced at $49 for 50 milliliters. Women reach for it because they want the citrus patchouli chic of Coco Mademoiselle, without spending Chanel money for a formula that many loyal wearers quietly admit is not what it once was. On skin, Floral Grapefruit opens with a brisk, dry citrus brightness that feels more grapefruit peel than sugared orange, then folds into rose, a faintly sheer jasmine, and a patchouli base that stays tidy instead of muddy. What it does unusually well is restraint. It gives you the architecture of Coco Mademoiselle, without that self-conscious sparkle that can make the original feel like it is trying just a little too hard under bright lighting. The flaw is that its opening is less faceted than Chanel's, so if you live for that high Polish first 15 minutes, you will notice the missing sheen. File away the word restraint, because one of these dupes wins almost entirely on that quality. Then came Armaf Club de Nuit Women, $39.99 for 105 milliliters. One of the most discussed Coco Mademoiselle alternatives for women who care more about projection and duration than delicacy. People reach for it because they want the Chanel silhouette, the citrus chypre shape, but they want it louder, and they want it to stay put through lunch, a commute, and whatever indignity the office heating system is doing that day. The scent profile is recognizably in the family: tart bergamot, grapefruit bitterness, rose that leans a little more cosmetic, and a patchouli musk base with a dry amber undertone. What it does well is longevity. It hangs on, it trails, it performs. But here is the catch: the counter will never tell you, because there is no counter, only internet praise and overconfident strangers. The opening is much sharper than people admit, and on mature skin, that extra bite can read less Parisian polish and more aggressive department store enthusiasm. This is your first clue that better than Chanel often means better at being noticed, which is not remotely the same thing. That is the pattern already, isn't it? Some dupes are trying to imitate Chanel's elegance. Others are trying to correct what they think women complain about, and they usually overcorrect. Maison Alhambra Como Moiselle, $29.99 for 100 milliliters, is positioned for the woman who wants the idea of Coco Mademoiselle at a price that barely requires a conversation with herself. It is the bottle people buy because the name is a wink, the price is low enough to feel clever, and the online chatter promises a near-identical experience. On paper and on first spray, it gives the expected citrus flash, soft white florals, and sweet patchouli trail, but the texture is different almost immediately. Denser in the top and thinner in the middle, as though the outer lines were copied more carefully than the interior. What it does genuinely well is immediate familiarity. If someone sprayed this in passing, most civilians would file it under polished feminine designer and move on. The flaw is that it lacks tension, and without tension a Chanel-style structure turns soft around the edges very quickly. It smells pleasant, it does not smell expensive. Keep that distinction in your pocket. Zara Applejuice, $25.90 for 90 milliliters, is the dupe women mention in a slightly lowered voice because it is inexpensive enough to embarrass the category. It is usually reached for as a chanso tendre alternative by women who want freshness without sugar and prettiness without juvenile fruit syrup. The profile is airy apple skin, pink grapefruit, peony, a translucent rose effect, and a whisper of clean musk underneath, all rendered in that familiar Zara way that suggests a watercolor version of the idea rather than a thick oil painting. What it does beautifully is mood. It captures the lightness and daytime grace of chanso tendre without becoming shampoo-like. The catch is that it disappears faster than most women over 40 will tolerate if they are actually leaving the house for more than 90 minutes. And there is another small problem. Because it is so airy, it can make the original Chanel seem more fully formed by contrast. This is one of those cases where cheap does not feel vulgar. It just feels unfinished. And this is where the conversation gets more interesting than the usual dupe theatrics. Sometimes the cheaper bottle is not better because it is closer. It is better because it edits the right excess. Other times it simply runs out of ideas too early. La Rive Madame Isabelle, $17.99 for 90 milliliters, is one of those old-school European budget buys women discover in airport shops, online discounters, or through a friend who knows the strange corners of fragrance retail better than she knows her own family. It is another Coco Mademoiselle adjacent scent, but unlike the louder copycats, it leans into a softer citrus opening, more powder through the floral heart, and a patchouli base that is gentler, almost brushed with vanilla dust rather than lacquered with gloss. What it does surprisingly well is civility. It smells mannered. It smells neat. It smells as though no one in the room needs to know what you spent. The flaw is quality of texture in the dry down. After 3 to 4 hours, the musk turns a little papery and the whole thing loses shape, which is precisely when Chanel, at its best, starts becoming more interesting. So yes, it is lovely for the money. No, it is not secretly superior. Jenny Glow Allure, $19.99 for 80 milliliters, exists in that very specific dupe world where the bottle is trying not to get sued, and the customer is trying not to get irritated by spending prestige money on a scent she only likes in theory. Women reach for it because Chanel Allure has become oddly expensive for how softly it wears, and they want that creamy citrus floral femininity without paying for the logo and the mythology. On skin, Jenny Glow Allure gives a lemon vanilla opening, soft florals through the center, and a powdery muskwood finish that tries very hard to suggest the original's understated satin texture. What it does well is warmth. It has a pleasing, easy femininity that sits close and behaves. But the catch is that it lacks the original's quiet sophistication in motion. The transitions are more abrupt, the base flatter, and the whole thing feels as though it was built from memory rather than from actual structural understanding. That matters more than women are often told. By now you can probably feel the difference between imitation and interpretation, and that is really what we are testing. Not who copied Chanel most loudly, who understood what should have been changed and what should have been left alone. Oil Perfumery's impression of Chanel Chance Eau Fraîche, $16.95 for 10 milliliters, is for the woman who is tired of underperforming fresh perfume and has decided, quite reasonably, that maybe oil is the more intelligent route. People reach for it because Chance Eau Fraîche is one of the most charming things Chanel makes, and one of the most frustrating when you want it to last past coffee. This oil version gives you citron brightness, a crisp, almost wet green woodiness, and that clean, citrus cedar breeze the original wears so effortlessly, but with the volume turned inward. What it does well is intimacy. It clings to the skin in a beautiful, close way and gives you the outline of Eau Fraîche without the evaporative panic. The flaw is obvious once you compare it directly. It loses the lift that makes the original feel airborne. This is a beautiful personal adaptation. It is not a replacement for the real structure moving through air around you. The last one was Perfume Parlour's Mademoiselle for women, $32 for 50 milliliters. And this is the sort of bottle women with developed taste often hesitate to try because the branding is not seductive enough to flatter their vanity. That, in this case, is a mistake. It is positioned quietly, almost drably, but what sits inside is a more disciplined take on the Coco Mademoiselle idea than several better-known dupes manage. The opening is bitter orange peel rather than generic citrus shimmer, the rose is dry rather than dewy, and the patchouli is handled with a light enough hand that the whole composition stays elegant instead of loud. What it does exceptionally well is proportion, and proportion is where most dupe brands fail because they think intensity is the same thing as sophistication. The flaw is that it lacks some of Chanel's textural elegance right at the top, that expensive lacquered glow in the first few minutes. But unlike many of the others, it earns your respect as it develops, not the reverse. If you want links to the exact bottles, along with the comparison sheet I use when testing dupes against prestige originals, it is all in the description. I put it there because most women do not need more temptation, they need a better filter. I certainly wish I had one years ago. Before I tell you which one won, here is what I actually scored, because I did not rank them on compliments, hype, or how close they smelled in the first 10 seconds. First was structural intelligence, meaning whether the dupe understood which parts of the Chanel original are essential and which parts are merely branding theater. Second was midwear dignity, which matters more than almost anything else because a perfume that impresses for 12 minutes and then turns blurry is not better than anything. Third was price to self-respect ratio. And yes, that is a real criterion in this context, because overpaying for mediocrity is irritating, but underpaying for sloppiness is worse. Fourth was edit value, the thing most people miss entirely. Did the dupe improve a flaw in the current Chanel formula, whether that flaw was excessive sweetness, weak longevity, or an opening that feels more polished than wearable? The winner was Dossier Floral Grapefruit, $49 for 50 milliliters. And once the test was framed properly, it was not even a close emotional decision, only a clear technical one. This is where I want you to remember both of the phrases I told you to keep. Better judged, restraint. Floral Grapefruit won because it understood the assignment better than the original currently does. It held the Coco Mademoiselle silhouette without the slightly overbright self-awareness Chanel now carries at modern prices. It performed with composure through the middle hours instead of peacocking in the opening and thinning out later. Its price to self-respect ratio was excellent, because at $49 for 50 milliliters it did not ask you to finance someone else's myth, only to evaluate your own nose. And most importantly, its edit value was the strongest in the group. It did not merely imitate Coco Mademoiselle, it quietly corrected it. That conclusion was reinforced in a way I always find reassuring. An independent collector whose wardrobe runs heavily French and who usually dismisses dupes as blunt instruments, smelled Floral Grapefruit and said, without being prompted, that it had removed the "look at me" layer that modern Coco Mademoiselle sometimes cannot resist. A fragrance consultant who works with private clients over 40 noticed almost the exact same thing from the other direction. She said it gave her the posture of the Chanel without the performative sparkle, which is almost absurdly close to the note I had already written about restraint before I asked her opinion. When separate noses land on the same diagnosis, I trust that more than marketing copy every single time. So here is the buy guide I would actually give to a woman I respected. Buy Dossier Floral Grapefruit, $49 for 50 milliliters. If you want the best all-around Coco Mademoiselle alternative and your taste runs to polish without theatricality. Buy Perfume Parlour's Mademoiselle for women, $32 for 50 milliliters. If you want a sharper, drier, more tailored version of that same Chanel idea, and you do not care whether the bottle flatters your dressing table. Buy Zara Applejuice, $25.90 for 90 milliliters. If what you love is the mood of chance au tendre, and you are willing to trade longevity for lightness, especially in spring or on weekends when reapplying does not annoy you. Buy Oil Perfumery's impression of Chance Eau Fraîche, $116.95 for 10 milliliters. If you want the spirit of Eau Fraîche in private rather than the full projection of it in public. Buy Armaf Club de Nuit Women, $39.99 for 105 milliliters. If you like your citrus patchouli fragrances louder, longer, and a little less subtle than Chanel intends. Buy La Rive Madame Isabelle, $17.99 for 90 milliliters. If budget matters most and you want a polite, wearable nod to Coco Mademoiselle, without pretending it is a perfect substitute. Buy Jenny Glow Allure, $19.99 for 80 milliliters. Only if you want an inexpensive, soft feminine daily scent, and are not demanding real Chanel-level development from it. The larger lesson is simple. The best dupe is not the one that copies every line. It is the one that understands which lines were worth saving. What this test really revealed is that women with mature taste are not looking for cheap shortcuts. They are looking for coherence, proportion, and the quiet pleasure of not being manipulated by price tags and prestige myths. Quality is not obedience, and loyalty should be earned every time you spray the bottle, not once at the counter and then forever after, because a brand trained you to feel guilty for comparing. If that is the kind of fragrance conversation you have been waiting for, then subscribe, because there is far too much money in this industry for us to keep being sentimental about underperforming luxury. And tell me in the comments which detail stayed with you more, the way Floral Grapefruit corrected Chanel through restraint, or the way Applejuice got the mood exactly right and then simply ran out of stamina too soon.